our guest speaker tonight is kind of an old friend, and we didn't get any backup on him, and so I kind of will do it off the top. It's Frank Gehry, and he's not sure if he wants to be here, he said. Or he said he's not sure if he's happy to be here tonight. We're happy to have him here. Frank is an old friend, actually. I think we first made each other's acquaintance a little over 20-some years ago. I was about, I guess, 2 years or so into the practice of architecture, and Frank was, I think, still a senior at USC, and we met at a mutual friend's house one night. And then through the years, we've come back and forth and crossed each other and talked to each other, and I've kind of followed Frank's career kind of from the sidelines, and maybe he's done the same with me. But he's probably I would say he's a very unusual architect in the city of Los Angeles, and that he's been basically a small practitioner, but he's had probably one of the most diversified practices at this scale that I think exists in the city. And he started, not like most of us, either in dealing in housing or houses, but I think, as I remember, the first project, well, I'd say about the second project, I'll go by the first one, but I think was Merriweather Theater back at Columbia. And that was a very early project that Frank did, and it was a very exciting project and one that gained national recognition. And from that time on, Frank has dealt in housing. He's also done a couple of artist studios, maybe more than that. There are two that I'm aware of, one for Lou Danziger and another that he did recently, and sorry, I don't remember the artist's name in that case, but it's also an exciting job. He's worked with his sister Doreen Nelson in working on environmental education, and they've made presentations back to the Smithsonian Institute. They developed this program through the city, and it's one of the most vital environmental education programs around. He's developed a line of furniture out of the tri-wall cardboard that many of you have probably seen, and many of our students have ripped off. There's a few examples around here in the various cubicles, which maybe is a lesson. You shouldn't design something that's too easy to produce by somebody else. I really don't know where that is at this point. And probably Frank will be one of the people changing the face of Santa Monica in the period to come. He, with the Rouse Company, is at this point in time has projected the new regional shopping center for Santa Monica, and he has recently been given the project of the Santa Monica Pier to work on. So I guess that I know I left out a lot of points, and I'm sure Frank will cover them as he goes. And as I say again, we're happy to have him with us tonight. And Frank.
Do I do this and that does it? Okay. I am happy to be here. I don't know quite how I managed to survive 12, 13 years of practice without talking to a group like this about my work, but I have. This is a first. I talk to clients and try and get them interested in what I'm doing, but to really come out and lay it on the line is a little difficult. I really have a fantasy that my work springs out of my subconscious directly to the building without any intellectual process in between, and that what is there is what it is, and it's very hard for me to go back and explain it. However, today when I was looking through the slides I was preparing, I realized that it's all very rational and really got me angry. Had nothing to do with my fantasy except for a couple of projects. Our office is made up now of about 11 people. In good times, last year it was up to 30. I kind of like it better the way it is because I have a better contact with the people, but the work is not all the work of myself. It is involved with other people. Greg Walsh has been with me since the beginning, and several other people have been involved in some of the current projects. It's hard to give credit to everybody while you're talking, but just realize it's not a one-man show. I've prepared the slides in no chronological order. I've decided to take you through a project that we have worked on for 5 years for the Rouse Company, doing a headquarters building in Columbia, Maryland. We've done several projects for them, and they entrusted us with this huge thing at first, which got whittled down to something about a third of what the original project was intended to be. And because of bad times, nobody wants to publish it because they don't want to publish their affluence when they're having problems, and so the project has not been published. It has not even been professionally photographed. The photographs you'll see are just taken by guys in the office, myself, on our trips back there. I have a pet peeve about buildings. I'm not one that likes going to a building that I call a skin job, walking inside and finding the same old acoustical tile and fluorescent lighting system and furniture or partition systems in offices, in department stores. They use the same acoustical tile ceiling, the same kind of lighting, and it bothers me that somebody doesn't think through a building. Now, maybe it's a very traditional kind of notion. Frank Gehry did a building from the all the way through, and it was a kind of a complete thing. I found myself in this project getting to the point where I didn't really care about the outside. It was such an uphill battle fighting with a client about their taste and stylistic requirements that I finally at one point threw up my hands and said, I'm really only interested in the interior systems, and you guys design the outside. And I'll show you that point in the work. So I've chosen to show the work from the inside out. I'll show you how the interiors evolved, and then how the exterior of the building evolved. And then there are several, if we still feel like going on, there are several other projects. We talk about one is the Ron Davis studio, which I happen to like very much and feel is more closely related to my fantasy of being a sort of a straight from the subconscious, although even that is maybe not as far out as I'd like to be. Can we turn them on? Please. Let's keep it informal. Please interrupt and ask questions. I'm really here to try and explain my stuff to you and to the students, and I hope you'll treat it informally. This is one of the better interiors in an office building that I found using the standard acoustical tile ceiling and downlights. I think it's the Weyerhaeuser building in Seattle by Skidmore's office, and this is the kind of thing that I personally object to. I find that the ceilings become very animated. They detract from people and from the space and are quite unnecessary. That a much better solution would be a simple white plane or neutral plane that doesn't carry your eye up there and doesn't interfere with your eyesight. This kind of lighting doesn't, I guess the standard lighting in an office building or a store is to light the space to 70, 80, 100 foot candles of light, and when the things go on full power, every corner of the space is lit like that, to that intensity, and that's, as lighting was going before the energy crisis, every year or every couple of years they upped the ante. It had to go higher and higher. And part of the reason was that the visual acuity was dropping sharply with the exposure of the eye to direct light. And a lot of games were played with it by putting lenses and things on it which cut the efficiency of fixtures and so on. Now our approach to it didn't grow out of the energy crisis, and some people disagree that we've done anything to help matters with the energy crisis. I think we have, but another peeve here are the office partitions, which in the case of this building cut the space in half, and so that all you see is heads popping above those partitions, and there's no sense of involvement between the spaces. People are just cubicled, and interaction happens if they happen to meet in one of these tunnels. Our first job, where I started playing with the lighting, was the Joseph Magnin store in Costa Mesa. It was an interior project. The original building was done by the Gruen office, and we were given the job of putting a 40,000 square foot store inside. First thing I did was cut a hole in the middle and put a restaurant in the center, partly because there was too much space. The store didn't need quite as much space as they leased at the time. You can see the beginning of the white ceiling and the indirect light. Intention here was to separate the architecture, the scale of the architecture, from the people and the merchandise, and to hide everything that wasn't being sold. The lighting trough, do I have a pointer somewhere? Somebody was going to give me a pointer. That trough going across the picture diagonally almost is a lighting trough. It has a combination of fluorescent and quartz lights, and all of the lighting is bounced except for decorative lighting, like at the top of this mural. That black slot under those decorative lights and up on the top is a 2-inch slot for distribution of supply air and return air. In contrast to the normal ceiling that uses metal diffusers and adds to the confusion, the metal diffusers, the acoustical tile, and the lights become some other kind of scene that has nothing to do with merchandise or the space. There's that black slot, which is the... Oh, yeah, great. Thank you. We added, we put, of course, indirect lighting totally on its own gets boring, and so you can't just... Oh, man, that's fantastic. Great. This is that slot. So we introduced decorative lighting, and in this case above eye level. It's still indirect, but we used glass. We were interested here in contrasting the inexpensive sheetrock material with a more elegant material to give the place some class, and we came on the idea of the glass slats, which we incorporated in these column heads and in a light fixture that's up there in the middle somewhere. And this is the salon. We also designed this furniture. This is the second store for Magnins in San Jose, which we carried the lighting forward. In the previous project, I felt that the architecture was a little bit still overpowering, and that I wanted to get something a lot simpler, a lot more neutral, something that could be more easily changed. So in the first store, we were able to work with the lighting and the space. All of these jobs were done very quickly. I don't know if you know that when you get a department store to do, you only have about 6 months. Their timelines are very tight, and so there's no real time for research. You got to do everything on the run and take it as it comes. We, in this case, decided to push at the edges a little and try something else. Try to incorporate the hanging fixtures and some of the fixturing with the lighting into the project. And that's what these things are we call them trees, and they have decorative lights on them. They have a variety of capabilities for hanging shoes and all kinds of stuff. And these are changeable. Here again you see the air conditioning slot, heating and air conditioning. These trees were movable. They were fastened here but could be moved, and there were a lot of other lights or power sources that they could be moved to. The intention was to be able to change the decor of the store very quickly. And Deborah Sussman, whom many of you know, worked on this signing thing, which these were removable. And I once visualized something like a Magritte with clouds hanging all over the thing and changing the whole quality of the store. An interesting thing about indirect light is that you can use, because you're not exposing the fixture, you can use the most efficient industrial fixtures, and as new lighting sources become available, because lighting experimentation is going on constantly, you can change the lights without major remodeling. Whereas if it's hung in the ceiling, it's part of the architecture. Another plus we found is that by not having the electrician interface with the sheetrock guys like usually is done, we gain some time in construction and save some money. Here again is the standard kind of ceiling. I just want to remind you, in case it's not indelibly impressed in your heads. I could have found worse examples, but I didn't have much time. From that, we went into the Rouse Company headquarters building, which was given to us. The program was a first phase of 250,000 square feet, and to be added to in 5 years with another 200,000 square feet. Developers were very optimistic in those days. This was 1969. The work you saw before that was 66 to 69. We did a diagram of what we thought we'd like. Let me get this thing out of the way. That was a distribution system for electricity under the floor, a distribution system for HVAC above, and some kind of a tree like the one we used in Magnin's for indirect light, and possibly we experimented also with putting the air down here and doing everything through these things. We explored, I would say, 15 or so systems in trying to arrive at a solution. The one we ended up with is quite close to this very original diagram done in '69. In order to study the interiors, we made a very elaborate model. Fred Usher, who some of you know, was working in the office at the time and helped direct this operation. We built a modular model that could, with sections, we had about 12 sections, so we could almost build a whole floor of the office building. And let me say that the interior work was going on simultaneously with the exterior. In other words, we arrived at a bay size. We had sold our notion of indirect lighting to the client, and all we had to do was make it work, make the thing work and work economically. And so we were off to the races on that, while the process of deciding how big the building should be and what shape it should be and what size it should be was going on, which was pretty interesting, because this went way ahead of the other, and when we started construction it was very easy to plug in. The first model, the first go-around, our first presentation, and I'll show you the exterior of the building that went with this later on, had the notion of building small, separate structures, almost like dwellings with a roof on them, so that they didn't touch the ceiling, so that they were totally changeable, and with glass in them and clustering them around spaces that would make conference spaces and give more interest, more animation to the interiors than the system I showed you in the Weyerhaeuser. Deborah did the graphics in this model and went a little far, I think, with some of the decoration. This was a slide I made, interior I had made on the model in 3/4 inch scale to show that furniture like this was more at home in a much more neutral environment, if you could accomplish it, than it would be in a space with the acoustical tile ceiling and the fluorescent lights and so on. And this was part of our selling tool to the client, to show them that there were more aesthetic options with this kind of space than there were possible, and it was a real valuable thing to allow, since people in the company could then express themselves more in other words, as we took more things out of that conflicted with the space out of the space, the individuals working there could put more things of their own in it. And that was the idealistic notion. We explored again, the flat white ceiling, and this was just a diagram of, this is in the model, of, what do you call that? Duct. Anyway, electrical duct that would be just screwed into the ceiling and brought down at any point with a column to energize the workstations. At this point, we couldn't find any economical way of getting an underfloor system. We explored many things ourselves. We looked at the computer floors, which in 1969 were vinyl with a vinyl edge. They were experimenting with carpeting, but it really looked crummy. It had each square had a vinyl edge around it, and it was kind of like, okay, we were getting rid of a lot of nonsense, but we were putting a lot back, and somehow it wasn't acceptable, and also the economics of it didn't seem to work. This shows how elaborate the models were that we made. We actually lit them with indirect lighting, the workstations. This system has since been used, and I'm sure he was working on it simultaneously since he wouldn't steal from us, by a lighting designer who did the Arco system, which is had its debut in Philadelphia a couple of years ago. This is that same model showing the layout of workspaces and trying to get that variety in texture in the layout that would make the space more interesting and develop enclaves of people so that it wasn't just endless office space and factory space like so many offices are. This is another view of the model, simplified, where we had again the duct on the ceiling and brought it down in sheetrock partitions to energize a whole row of desks. In this scheme, we hung the fluorescent light fixtures upside down. Wasn't very satisfactory. I'm going to show you stuff that we bombed on too. Is that all right? Or that I feel we bombed on. You may feel we bombed on other things, but this was, and each step in this process, we had to develop our own cost estimating and our own technology in many cases. This is the final system, this diagrammatic section of the final system, and we ended up with a computer floor. It took about a year's work working with the computer floor manufacturers and the carpet people to get rid of the vinyl strip around the edge. We found a carpeting mill that would weave the carpet in such a way that it would not fray at the edge, and we put them together with the floor people, and it took about a year of work until they came up with something that was seamless and you can't really tell the lines of carpeting. You don't know you're on an access floor. Another consideration was another requirement that we imposed on the floor people was to make it soundproof, so that you didn't walk along and have rocking panels and so on and so forth. And that was very complicated. They'd been used to working with less restrictive conditions, and but I must say they welcomed the idea. They knew that if we pulled it off, they would have a wider market. And since the building is finished, they're advertising the hell out of it. I don't know what they're doing with it, but we fooled around with the ceiling and came up with a system of delivering air at the column heads using the ceiling as a supply plenum. We developed a workstation light that was both up and down, that was fastened to the partition, that would be fluorescent, and so that there would be a task light over a typewriter, but none of it direct. Your eye would not see the light source. And then, and this is capsulizing, we took and developed this magic wand thing, a little stick with a light on top of it. We spent about a year on that, and you'll see pictures of it. In order to study it further, we built a full mock-up in our office, white ceiling. This is the 30 by 30 bay and the floor-to-ceiling height, which was 11 feet at this time. It then came down to 10.6. That was the only change that we had to impose on it. We started working with this pipe and various configurations of lights on the top. One of the notions I had, or trying to accomplish, was to get a scale variance between the fixture size and the amount of light it delivered, so that if we were lucky, we would have the illusion of no lighting system, or not a lighting system that was turning out as much light as you were getting. And in many respects, it worked. Although we started out with the rule that each workstation would have a light fixture of its own, as we evolved the project, we took the light off the top wherever we could and put it on a file cabinet. So we broke the rule. The idea was to take a rule and then break it. And this was the first mock-up we made of the system in Columbia, Maryland, in an industrial space. Here we started getting into the design of the workstation partitions. Now, one thing I didn't explain are the acoustical problems we ran into. By taking all the acoustical tile off the ceiling, we're going against the Ten Commandments as stated by Owens Corning, who sell acoustical tile, and they still publish those 10 Commandments. That if you took the absorptive material off the ceiling, you would get noise reflection throughout the place, and you would pick up conversations 50 feet or 60 feet away. We had an acoustician working with us. We'd done some work with the Hollywood Bowl and the Merriweather Post Symphony Shed, and we called that guy in. He'd never worked on office space, but we got down to basics and did some modeling acoustically of the project, and found that with our ceiling height, now it's maybe not possible to do it in a spec office building where you have lower heights, but with the ceiling heights that we had, we were able to get a leveling out, a plateau of sound that acted as a masking noise, and that instead of, as in the Weyerhaeuser building or many buildings that have the open landscape system, where they introduce a 30 decibel masking noise, we decided to use our own noise, our own office noise, and as that sound, masking noise, if we could make it work for us, and it did.
What were the heights of the ceiling?
10.6, floor to ceiling. The reason we went to those heights grew out of the scale of the building. It was a 3 or 4 story building that we were studying. So the imposition of those heights wasn't a big cost factor as it would be in a high-rise. We had wide open spaces. We had floors that were 40,000 square feet. We opted for big factory type space, and I'll explain that in the site diagrams. So that we wanted to gain some of the space quality back by raising the height. A 9-foot or 8-foot 6 ceiling would have been, we felt, oppressive on 40,000 square feet. In this system, we developed worked a system with Celotex and horizontal bands, and got carried away with color changes and so on. Although we didn't intend to do it as a stripe thing, we were trying to develop that variety of a modular unit that could have a variety of heights. And this was the first attempt at the lighting thing as a manufactured item. I believe Light O'Lear made the first ones for us. This bombed. We didn't like it. We went back to the modeling and started working with more animated partitions. We decided that the most flexible system really was sheetrock walls. As long as you kept the electrical and plumbing and stuff out of it, you could take it apart and put it together easily. And we started to play with those kind of things in the white walls or the gray walls, and then the blue would have been some kind of an absorptive material. This was a mock-up in the same space that the banding mock-up was done. You can see the light has the dimmer switch on it. There are 2 quartz lights in it, 1,000 watts per unit. In all of the photographs, you'll see the dark and light spots on the ceiling. They're not as apparent in reality as they are here. It's just photographic. They're of course there, but they're not as apparent. We developed this system of walls. We ended up with 2 heights because of expense, but it's a combination of fiberglass and sisal material, and a layer of sheetrock as a block between them, so that there's sound stoppage between here, and there's absorption. When the mock-up was finished, we tested it with a full load of complement of people for that amount of square footage, and tested the acoustics, and we were getting ratings much better than an acoustical tile ceiling. I can't explain those to you because I'm not an acoustician, but we have a whole report somewhere if anybody's interested. In the mock-up, we even went so far as to put in fake windows and a mural of the lake, the view that the project was going to look out on. We built an enclosed space to show how a conference room might work, using plexiglass panels and sheetrock. This is the building under construction. You can see the raised floor. They were 2x2 panels, and you can see that there's very little apparent seam here. There are some color changes, and those were worked on. But basically, if you walk through it, you can't see the seams. Again, the combination of open space and sheetrock walls. We developed a connection for telephone and lighting so that anybody in the workstation could move the whole thing themselves. You didn't have to bring in an electrician each time you changed. You could move your phone if you needed. And the cost savings in this system over a standard poke the hole through the floor system in most spec office buildings is quite phenomenal. It's really impressive. This is during construction. Let's see if I can see. And this is a finished space. Now some of it came off and some of it didn't, so I was sort of pleased with this area. The system is demountable and movable, but we did accomplish the variety, and I think you can get an idea of the relationship of the fixture to the scale of the light. It sort of works. One of the requirements we had in this building was to use all of the existing furniture. They didn't want to buy any new pieces, so that's what you see. One of the advantages of this is if this guy doesn't come in on that day, his light doesn't go on. So there's an energy saving there. And since a lot of the people in this company travel, there is a considerable saving for that. Also, if you're near an outside wall, a window wall, most of the day you don't need to turn on your light. If you need some of it, you can turn on this. We were not able to afford the dimmer, so we ultimately went to 2 switches right up in top, 2 little buttons up in the top here, and you can turn on each quartz light separately. There's a lot of repetition here. I just thought I'd show a lot of stuff and you can get an idea. The combination of the partition system and the sheetrock. Some of it got a little rigid. I didn't like this as well, but these were the project directors. These are the guys that hire architects in this company. Each one of these guys is a client. One of the games we played with it at an early stage was it was going on simultaneously with the development of the cardboard furniture, and we did do a system made of cardboard, and we sent back this desk for one of the executives just as an example. The cost of doing the whole system in cardboard would have been about half of what this system cost, and was as effective acoustically. Only problem was getting somebody to make it.
How's the life of that cardboard?
I have pieces that are 6 or 7 years old, so it's still holding up. We laid out the system so that you walk into spaces and get vistas, because the original intention was that there would be nothing against the window walls, and in the final hours of the project, all the executives scrambled for the windows just like everybody else, every other office building, and we almost had a revolt on our hands. So we were able to soften the blow by making wide vistas at diagonals through the space, 2 windows. And in the case of the legal department, which there are some pictures further on, where they wouldn't accept the open system at all. We developed diagonal corridors to the window walls and terminated them with conference rooms, so that 5 or 6 lawyers had a conference room on a window wall. This is executive space against the window, and you can see we talked them into having windows so that their secretaries could look out through their space to the outside. That's the combination of fluorescent light on in the conference rooms, which has a downlight and uplight. Yeah, it's sisal. That was a whole experiment in itself to get something that would stretch and hold and be acoustically transparent enough to allow the fiberglass to work.
How high can you mount our buttons for that light switch?
I can reach them, and I'm 5'8", so I know.
How come you decided to put them up there and not down where you switch while you're sitting there?
It was just cheaper. It was when we got down to it, we had to cut as much money as we could out of some of these things, and the cost of running them down the pole to a closer position was about another $20. Each fixture cost $150, and $20 times 300 fixtures was a sizable amount. This is that legal section. You can see a corridor going out to a window wall and a small conference room. Then off to the left there was another one. This came out awfully nice because it looked like a little village in itself. It had, I mean, in a more rigid form, it had some of the quality of Mykonos, which I like. You know, the little white buildings separate and windows and. Huh? Which one? All of them. Okay. This is along the window wall in the legal section. We separated the little lawyers' offices from the outside wall, so there's a corridor. You walk through here. But another quality is it's just when you walk out to the edge and look out the window, you can look back and get the whole expanse of glass rather than just a small section. Okay, the center of the building is a big court. It has a skylight and stairs. The office part of the building is 3 floors. This is the center level, the main level that you enter on. You go down to offices and up to offices. The 4th floor is a multi-purpose room and boardroom for the company. The multi-purpose room is a room that the company gave to the community. It's to be used for weddings and bar mitzvahs and what have you. It was Jim Rouse's idealistic notion, and it's interesting because you can see how it manifested itself in earlier models. It was separate buildings for a while, and it was going to be a performing arts laboratory and many other things. When the crunch hit, it finally moved up top and became just a part of this building. This is a plan of that center, and these are the stairs. And we treated this like a street with the elevators and toilets and small, this doesn't show them, but small offices, those sheetrock offices, forming a street on both sides, so that as you walked through down the street, you entered from a receptionist into a department, and then you opened into the section of open landscape. This is a picture of that street with the small offices that also open into the central space. This is a conference room that looks out from the legal department that looks out into that space. We originally had this much lower, and the lawyers didn't like it. Lawyers are very secretive, we found out. Most of these pictures were taken during construction or just at the tail end, so there's tape and stuff on them, but you can get the idea. This is some more photographs of the big space, which is okay. It's not. Out there. Yeah, those are for potted plants, pots that found their way into it later. The client, the Rouse Company had their own design department, own architects, their own interiors department, and heads of those departments played and meddled with every section, every part of this building. They were constantly at us. We had to present to them, justify everything, and one of the guys is a plant freak, and he wanted those potted things. In order to get the building built, though, we had to deal with all of those issues and parry and thrust with them and play our little chess game to turn them around into something that we could accept. You'll see the trellises that were imposed on us and how we dealt with those. That's the boardroom up there. The glass around it is because of a fire separation. We could only go 3 floors without open without a separation. And here you can see all 4 floors, kind of, the lower, middle. You can see the pots in there now. I forget what comes next. Anybody want to ask any questions? Well,
Multi-purpose or functional? People will use it?
yes. Don't change. Was that the last of the slides? Maybe we had run to the end. I don't know. An empty slide tray. You're lucky. Yeah, that's right. That's the next slide. Okay, this is a diagram of the site. I thought it would be interesting to show this process to you as students because you're going to find yourself doing a lot of this. Our first diagram, or the most obvious diagram, is to do some kind of a crankshaft building, which the width between outside walls about 60, 65, 70 feet, so that there's a lot of window wall and everybody gets a window. At least it was the direction that was most obvious for this company, because they wanted everybody to, they had the notion that everybody should have the same kind of space and the same options. We felt that it would be totally inflexible, that it would be difficult to expand and contract as they finally had to, and more expensive because of the perimeter. It's located in downtown Columbia, which is a new town, has a reception center, office building, another office tower proposed on a fountain that's very jazzy, that looks like something out of Tivoli, and proposed stores and a big shopping center across the highway. This is the main center of the new town of Columbia. The alternate we proposed is big factory space, some big block tied into a system of parking that just obviously was a lot cheaper to build and allowed for more options in the rearrangement of space inside. We started our designs by building selecting a module. These boxes, I think at the time they were, at this scale, they were 60 by 60, so that each of these ended up in 4 modules in our final design. We developed circulation core and paths and cores just arbitrarily by studying distances from cores to office space and so on. And in the program at this time, there were a couple of theaters and a multi-purpose cafeteria and various other things that finally were absorbed into the project or lost. We used that model to build up the spaces and study what the different volumes would look like in that space, and it was a very comfortable tool. We did diagrams with it showing how spaces would work in relation to the downtown and etc., and the various phases and so on. This shows the final configuration that we arrived at this phase, which was an office building, the public uses, and then underneath all of this was to be parking, deck parking. That's a section through the model, or through the building at that time. We then played with various options using those same blocks, showing how the building could expand. And I guess this is a metabolist building, you might call it today, if you were to carry this forward. There was no intention at architecture at this point. It looked like it, but it wasn't. It was deceiving. We showed that it could add a high-rise, or build up into a, in other words, it wasn't a closed form. It was easily added to as the project went ahead. And our intention was to develop using the bay systems that we developed and allow, even during working drawings, for the addition or deletion of bays, so that right up until the last minute they could change the project because of the open-ended form. Here was the beginning of that interior court. These were the twin cinemas, and then the multi-purpose room, which eventually went on top. The Rouse Company liked the low-rise idea. That was one of their requests to us, was to start out with a low-rise building, so they weren't the most overpowering building in downtown Columbia. This was the final program at this stage. And this showed the ultimate expansion that we were on. Yeah. From this, we got gutsy and made a model of architecture. Now, we just went directly without a lot of time spent. We just took our bay system, and the cheapest material to use there was brick. The cheapest structural system was steel. And we just took that thing up to the next scale and saw what it looked like, and we liked it. This shows the underground parking. These are the cinemas, the main court, the 30 by 30 bays, and terraces, which grew out of that funny little model. I mean, it just, the little white model somehow led us to this configuration, and we were able to live with it. This was in 1969. 1970, somewhere in there. How you waterproof that glass, we weren't at that point at that time. This is the main entrance into that court. I guess the court looked a little bit like the Ford Foundation building. Our intention was to develop just a very simple industrial building, and that's what we thought we had, similar to a lot of the factory buildings around Baltimore and Washington. We were goofing around with these projected windows, which probably never would have happened, but here you see the model was made so the floors could come apart, so we could start to explore our interior systems. But here's the 30 by 30 bay, and the beginning of the system we finally ended up with. After that one was rejected and the project was changed, we then, they eliminated some of it, they cut down the size of it, they found they couldn't do deck parking within their budget, but it was more that they couldn't, their traffic system in downtown Columbia was not designed to take that number of cars. It was really funny how the crunch came in that way instead of really in the economics of the building. It was more that in laying out Columbia, because it was a new town, because they had to be conservative with their lenders, they built a building that was, they built a town based on existing systems of roadways and utility distribution, and because they couldn't get the money to experiment further or do push for a more elaborate system, those systems finally came back to haunt them, and in traffic, in relocation of sewers. Their sewer system all is in an easement that runs right along the edge of the lake and is constantly thwarting any attempt to take buildings and hang them out over the lake or do anything with them. So that we're always having to set back. Many of those things were built into the town, and they were things that nobody could cope with. The system just wouldn't let you do anything different. Here was the restaurant and multi-purpose room that was a performing arts laboratory, and the office building was at this stage about 150,000 square feet, or a third less than the original program. Panel.